Hi everyone, this is Brandon, creator of Project P, and I wanted to do a post-mortem development video about the game's development process and through like how the game came to be. Project P was made for the Buswick 2016. It's a month-long game jam where you have to make a game under a theme. This took place in September, and the theme was Fail to Win. And so I kind of loosely took the interpretation of like a trial and error, but more of just kind of like figuring out your own way of approaching a level. Also note that the video will have some timestamps in the description, so if you want to jump ahead to certain parts of it that you might be more interested in, you can just click on those. And if you haven't checked the game out, the link will also be down below. The game is a top-down shooter, and I'll load it up for you right now, so you can kind of get a gist of what the game's about. You basically just clear out enemies from room to room, and you're just trying to, you just unlock different weapons, and you just kind of go through level by level. So it's your typical WASD movement code. You got your mouse to look around. You press R to reload, you know, basic gameplay mechanics. And I'll talk a little bit about the level design later, but it's pretty much what you see right here is exactly what it is. So you're just kind of going from room to room, killing enemies, and you can also melee them. And yeah, that's essentially what this game is. Project P was a rather difficult game to develop because of the fact that I was actually working like 2 jobs, and so it wasn't easy having that much free time to be able to like actually like add more to it. Actually, a lot of stuff got cut. So whenever I go about developing a video game, I always start with WordPad or Notepad, and I always usually start with a very general direction for my games. But lately, I've kind of tried to avoid doing that. In fact, I've found that it's a lot easier to develop a game when you only have a very short, very brief description of what it is you're trying to work towards, and then you just kind of keep your tasks very short. So for example, I could say, this is a shooting game about killing dudes and winning. That's, in a sense, that is what this game is in its barest form. Now, I sometimes like to have another, like, a task list, and this is what I'm talking about in terms of, like, just keeping it very short and very brief. So, let's say, tasks, or to-dos, and then I would put, like, create sprite for enemy, and then code in enemy. And I might just do that. I'm not gonna write down everything. I'm not gonna do this for freaking 20 enemies and then, you know, just I have to do this all today. It's like I found that it's actually a lot easier to breadcrumb it and just focus on the next thing. Don't jump ahead. So anyways, that is essentially what how I how I kind of lay out my design documents. I don't do anything overly extravagant, though it's very fun to, especially in the beginning. It's very easy to get caught up in getting really excited and just like having all these really cool ideas that in your head seem like they play amazingly, but usually I found that like sometimes that's true and sometimes that's not. It's just one of those things where you can try to like plan everything out with, oh, the player's gonna unlock the ability to turn into a ball and then they can like, I don't know, levitate and crap. Like, and then you might lay out an entire like area around that. And then you find out it actually plays horribly, but you never know. You have to play test that. So I went about this game with sort of starting with very bare bones prototyping, and I wasn't even sure if I was gonna be able to finish this game. So this is the very first version, the very first iteration of this game, which is I just designed, again, I breadcrumbed it. I was just, let's just code in the base mechanics. So let's get the movement code down so you can, you know, move diagonally, the collision's working good. And then you also got this mouse cursor as well, so the camera actually kind of smoothly moves around with it. And then you can shoot your gun. It's just a little line, which actually is pretty much the same as what it was when it in the final version, just it's tweaked a little bit more. So yeah, that's really it. This is the game. This is the bare bones very first iteration, and that's how it all kind of starts. And then the next version, I kind of I learned about the pathing code in GameMaker. It's the exact same type of code that Hotline Miami uses. In fact, because it's built into GameMaker. It's not. I didn't pirate their code. It's just that's GameMaker. So it's a very impressive system because all you have to do is literally create like a grid, and then you just make the AI. It's really easy. It's surprising how easy it is. Even though like at face value, like the AI seems like really like awesome, like really intelligent, but really it's actually just mostly GameMaker doing the blunt of the work. And so this was mostly me just play testing. I also coded the little flash, which pretty much is the exact same gun flash as the final version. It's that little white muzzle flash, and there's also like a little tracer bullet. So yeah, that's basically what this version is. The enemies just can hear gunshot sounds. There's also like a random target you can shoot, but yeah, it's pretty glitchy, obviously. But this is also the beta version of the or the alpha version of the enemy terrorist enemy. So yeah, I'll just kind of run through the versions very briefly, and then we'll just kind of get right to the how the code was made. This is where I started using the that built-in code that I was talking about. It does store the enemy's direction, so you can kind of see how the enemy is able to kind of like face certain directions. So that was kind of nice, but I still have to like, they still kind of run towards you at a certain range. So if they see you, they'll just kind of like run straight towards you and such. And this was also me coding in there I call them statuses. So they enter certain statuses depending on what's going on. So right now, when there's like a certain alarm that ticks down, they'll start their attack animation, so they're going to be shooting at me, but obviously there's no bullets coming out. Otherwise, it looks like they don't see me, so they're going to run over to where I am, so they're chasing. That's essentially the basis. So they always start at like none, and then they spot, and then they'll chase after me. I can kind of run through that in the code to kind of give you a more general idea, but that's what I was kind of testing was the statuses. And that was probably the most difficult thing to code, was the enemy AI, like getting them to enter certain statuses and making sure they see you at a certain distance, making sure you can cloak in front of them. So this version was a pretty big step because the AI is able to, you can confuse them when you enter cloak. See how there's a question mark that kind of appears? Because he's like, oh, where'd he go? Like, what the heck? Like, and then he just shoots where he thinks he saw you. You can also kind of like trick them. So now he's like, I can kind of make this guy like shoot in that direction. He's running towards there, but I'm not there. So you get the idea. Like I wanted to make AI that instead of like Hotline Miami, how they could just instantly like see you from behind, instead like you could actually kind of like sneak around them and actually like play a little bit more tactically, which is the way I wanted to approach it. I also ended up coding some of the enemy like little melee effects, so the little death animations. The melee was probably one of the most enjoyable things to code in the game. It was definitely one of the funnest. Getting that little hand animation to work right. I'm going to go back a version because I'm pretty sure that little hand that appears, that was kind of a pain to code. That took a lot of like recompiling, just like starting the game. Oh, okay, the hand's a little bit off. Let's just move it a little bit to the left, like that kind of deal. Because it's actually for like the first 3 frames, it's actually kind of like snapping towards the point where it's going to be smacking the enemy. So it's only an effect, but that's just kind of like the amount of work that goes into that. Even though it's so stupid, it's just a hand touching, like a little hand with a little popping explosion, you know? But there's a lot of like work that goes into making sure stuff looks just right. I'll just kind of go through a few more versions and then we'll just kind of like go from there. I kind of added more UI work as well. The player can take damage. I added patrol patterns so enemies can kind of look around and such. Again, a lot of the versions in the very beginning are just a lot of tests. So a lot of what you're going to be seeing is mostly just like the same. It's just a lot of iteration, and just a lot of it was just play testing to make sure, does this work correctly, and just making sure the very basis of what the AI works very well. And there's also some tile testing there. And yeah, and so in the very beginning, it really didn't seem like I was going to have a game at the end. It really just seemed like I was just going to have like a really rough prototype. But it was up until a little bit later when I started adding more enemies was where I finally like actually like felt like I stood a chance. And so the shield enemy you see here was probably the most difficult enemy to add, just because of how I had to create a bunch of exceptions to make sure the player's angle to the enemy's angle is correct. And just, yeah, that was a huge pain. That was probably the biggest pain to code. The machine gunner guy was actually very easy. He's actually just very similar to the generic terrorist enemy. The only difference is I just made it so he shoots like for a longer period of time. So you have to kind of sneak around them. The heavy machine gun guy has more health, so you have to kind of like melee him more. But that's this. Once I got this version done, it was very clear to me that I actually had like a version of the game like that actually could be playable. So it was till this point that I realized that I started to feel like actual like a morale boost, because it was I was really busy. Like I could not work on games at all. That's essentially, this is probably the biggest turning point in development. I also added the player's gun to the sprite. That was nothing I didn't point. I don't know if there's really much else to talk about after that. At this point, it was pretty much just adding the main menu. The logo was kind of like, I think the logo looks okay. It's just a little rough because of the I didn't use any anti-aliasing on the logo, so it looks a little like, I realized some colors here and there are kind of weird. But anyways, I got the main menu working. The save system wasn't too hard to code. Save systems are a little bit obnoxious, but I mean, the game is able to be started and played. I even added the tutorial graphics. At this point, I'll talk about more about the art and such later, but around this point, I was using an Excel document to actually cut a lot of content. Originally, there were going to be around 8 to 10 different enemy types, and there was going to be a lot of other things, a lot of other like interactive stuff, but it got cut simply because, well, one, I just don't have, like, I really did not have any time to develop this game, and the other reason was just to, I think the result of cutting a lot of stuff, though, I think the final game is very, very clean and very streamlined, and I actually really like that a lot. And the result, I think, is still a very fun and it's just a very clean game. It doesn't seem like it's too cluttered, and I think the way I laid out everything was very good. I don't know if it's this version or the later version, but there was one day where I pretty much just spent all day like making every single level, and that was pretty intense. But once I got pretty much all the levels like made, that was like that was a big turning point, and that was around like 5 days left. So that was pretty scary, because again, I was like working like every day, so at my job. So there's not much else I need to talk about for these later versions, so I guess I can just kind of start moving on to the next thing, which is code. I'm just going to open up the main source code that I use for this game. I'm not going to like reveal everything, but this will kind of give you a general idea of how it's kind of put together. It's not going to, I despise doing this because, one, it doesn't really show the trial and error and continual recompiling that actually goes into development. In my sprite library, I kind of have like the player sprite, so you can see, like, you know, he's got his own little walking animation. The gun isn't in his hand. The gun is actually a separate sprite. So you can see here's the sprite for the pistol. It's just a little block floating by itself. So this is kind of and here's the hand that I used for the melee. It's just a single picture, a single sprite, and I just make it rotate and move around with code. Animation code is at least in my opinion, is very difficult. Is a very challenging thing because you're not using something like Flash, you're not using After Effects to be able to like very precisely position things based on visual cues. Instead, you're positioning things based on numbers, and if you're really good, you don't even need to make assumptions. But otherwise, like for me, I'm not much of a coder, And so a lot of it, there's a lot of assumptions that are kind of made like, all right, well, let's move this by a speed of 6, and then it's too fast. It's like, oh crap, all right, let's go back down maybe 4.5. And it's like, it's still a little too fast. Maybe 4, and it's like, okay, there we go, just got it. Maybe let's crank it up a little bit, like 4.1, you know? So there's a lot of stuff like that that goes into animation code for like games. And that's that can be very challenging, and again, just a lot of iteration. But anyways, those sprites, they go into things called objects, and those are the actual interactable like things. Here's the player object. I just kind of create him, and he has all these things, all these like different variables. So they're kind of like, I can assign different numbers and such to it. So for example, this variable hurt invul max, that represents the amount of time you have like when you're hurt and then you're invulnerable. So this is actually, the game runs at 60 FPS. So if it's 150, that means you're invincible for 2.5 seconds. That's essentially what goes on. Like I have to create different variables. I have to create different things like the code, like the input code. I have to draw the player object. I'm not going to talk about it too much just because it can get very confusing. And the other thing too is this sort of thing, this is a very subjective part of game development because there are so many different ways to go about coding something that it's just kind of like, and I don't really consider myself to be an expert coder. I just kind of do what needs to be done to get what I want. So the result often is like a very cluttered but code that works. And so I don't like to show my code methods just because I find that they're not the best, but they work, and I don't think that's a good way to go about it. But anyways, I can kind of show the enemy AI just to kind of give you a better idea. So they have their own variables too. So this is the status I was talking about. So their status equals none. So they're idle. They just look in one direction forever and ever. Patrol, I can change the status to like patrol if I wanted to, like, you know, like that. And so I even like, these are comments right here. The green text is comments, so they don't do anything. They're just for reference for me to look at. So I'm like, oh, okay, what do I type in to like make sure like it does this? Or like, oh, stun is, oh, they can't see what they're looking at or whatever. Or wanders, they kind of like randomly walk around. I actually never got to code these two, but anyways, yeah. This is the sort of thing that like I was talking about. This is probably the most difficult thing to code, was the statuses. So I can kind of give you a very general idea of how the AI works. So when the player exists, so this draws the enemy sprite. This checks if the player is cloaked. This checks so they can like run towards the player if he's not invisible. SCR enemy spot player, that's a script that allows them to spot me. This is where things get a little dicey. This code was pretty annoying, and it took a while to get it right. Actually, you see all these copy-pasted scripts, or from bottom to top. That's like how it evolved. So you kind of see how it looks very similar, but I started to kind of like build upon it and build upon it more. And the code starts to get a little deeper until I finally end it with this. I'll kind of run through it even if people are really curious. Basically, the way this is blocked out is, I'll talk about these later, but this is checking, okay, is the player within my cone of vision? Okay, that's what this is checking. And maybe it says yes, and then it's and, so I also have to check this. So is there not a block between me and the player? Which makes sense. So basically, is there a wall between me and the player? So, because it'd be dumb if they were looking in your direction, the player's direction, but there was a wall between you, and then they still like saw you. So that's why that exists. And there's 4 of these because I found that it was a little too precise. So I try to like make that rule, the collision line like wider in a way. That's why there's 4 of these. And then this checks is the player not cloaked. That's just to make sure that, you know, if you're cloaked and they see that you're in their cone of vision and there's not a wall between you two, that they still can't see you, you know. So that's essentially how this code works. And these temporary variables is what I like to call them. These line width, that's just to to like kind of like the width of the line. That's it. I don't know if I'm like explaining it well, but that just kind of gives it, makes it so I can adjust the forgiveness of how much they'll be able to see like you if you're like if there's a wall between you two. And then vision cone is just, it just kind of tweaks it so their cone of vision's like shrunk a little bit. So that's essentially how this game's code works. And the AI, I'm not going to talk about this. I'll just kind of give a very general idea. You can kind of see how there's, if status equals none or status equals patrol, then, oh, if I see the player or do I hear a gunshot, then I'm in spot, I spot the player, like, aha, I heard something, and then there's like a little exclamation mark that appears above them. And then after that happens, they'll be like, all right, well then I'm going to enter spotting status. Okay, now I'm just going to stand still for like a very brief amount of time just to kind of be like, because I'm like reacting like, oh crap, I just heard something. I'm going to like, that's kind of like that point in time. So that's what spot is like. Or, oh my gosh, I see the player. Like, it's just like that split second before they actually like do anything. And so that timer is ticking down, and then it's like, okay, as the timer hits 0, all right, I'm going to chase after whatever I just heard or saw. And it just kind of, the code just kind of starts doing its thing. I'm going to run towards the player. If the player's within my attack range, I'm going to go enter attack phase. I'm going to stop moving, and I'm going to like ready my weapon. I'm going to like pull my gun up in front of myself, and I'm going to get ready to shoot at the player. And then as soon as that timer ticks down, I'm going to start firing some bullets. I'm sorry I'm like just blasting through the code, but like this just kind of like, that's just kind of how this all works. And like, oh, if I'm busy attacking and the player cloaks, I'm going to be confused, like, what, where did he go? And then like, that happens very briefly. So I think that's about it. That's probably the biggest challenge, was coding that AI, because getting that to work just right was pretty challenging. So hopefully I didn't like overwhelm you, but that's kind of how complex it can get. And this isn't even the most complex of AIs out there, but it's still a challenge to work with. We can talk about some of the level designs. So when I went about the game's layout, I can kind of talk about the first area just to kind of give a general idea. So this is GameMaker's level editor. It's one of the worst level editors out there. Biggest reason because you can't make a box to like drag and select stuff. But anyways, this is really what it is. I set my game's frame rate to 60, and then I set the room's height and width to whatever I want. So I could set it to like 15,000, but like, why the heck do I need this much space, you know? I can place objects, so I could have a bunch of players, but that's just not a good idea. I could add drywall. I can add anything I want. You know, that's the cool thing about this. This is probably one of the more enjoyable parts of game design. But even despite that, I had to make sure to teach the player and lay out every single level very peculiarly. These that little text at the bottom, I also have tiles here, so I can like draw tiles and stuff. It's gonna be a little bit laggy. I've got you know, this tutorial text, so I can kind of place it around, if that makes sense. So this first area I designed in a very particular way, which was, okay, this first part is kind of like the free moving area. You know, it's just get a feel for everything. Like, okay, this is your moving space. Just kind of, you know, get the hang of it. Oh, press R to reload. So there's a reason why I made the reload tutorial before the left click. And that was to make sure the player knew that, oh, press R to reload, so that they can play a little bit more tactically. And so they don't like, once they're out of ammo, they're like, holy crap, what do I press? Because they're in a frantic situation. So not all players follow through with that, and that's okay, but I tried to like teach that first because I want to be very like peculiar, like, you know, this is like once you know how to reload, then you can start having fun. But I just kind of laid out all the enemies in this kind of way. I can also kind of go into enemy code. So into certain objects, I can right click on him and change his direction. So I set this guy's direction to 0. So when you play the actual game, he's facing to the right. In the level editor, I don't see that. So that's also one of the other annoying things about GameMaker's room editor. But it gets the job done. You just gotta be very aware of what its limitations are, and you can do almost anything you want. What does this guy do? Direction 270. They already face 270 anyways, right? Oh, no, I see, okay. This guy faces, I think he default faces to the right. But yeah, that's essentially what this first room is. It's just, you know, here's how you move around, here's how you shoot dudes. That's it. Then the second area is pretty much just, okay, you can, if you're near an enemy, you can press a mouse button and you melee them. That text is actually a little bit different in the older versions, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. This also teaches the knife guys. I had an actual Excel document that said level 2 is teach melee, introduce knife guy. That's literally what I had a document say. This area is a review area, and also kind of introduces patrolling patterns a little bit more. Because these guys, they have like a patrol pattern. So this is really just a review room. That's all it is. This next room is a tutorial for cloaking. So I laid it out in such a way that was like, oh, like these guys are both like covering this like hallway. Like I'm gonna get hurt if I like try to like shoot them. I mean, this game is supposed to be easy in the beginning, so you can't obviously take both of them out very quickly. But it's just kind of like, it's just a tutorial. And these guys actually, these two knife guys actually face upwards. So yeah, that's essentially what it is. And then this is a review. It's like, okay, show me what you know. Do you know how to like cloak and melee people and shoot guys? That's it. And I just kind of lay out every room sequentially in such a way to accomplish that. That's what I focus on. I don't try to focus on making levels that just kill the player just because. I try not to. I really try to, like lately I've really tried to avoid making rooms that are just spike hallways. There's nothing worse than making rooms like that. But anyways, that's essentially what that's how I go about designing the levels. Let's get right to the graphics of the game. So here's this is basically the sprite sheets that I use to make the game. I start off with just some characters, just generic characters that I start off with. I can actually show you the alpha, very, very early alpha version of the player sprite. Here's kind of what he started off as. So this character right here, this was the very first like rough draft. He looks pretty scribbly. Obviously, he looks like he'd use some work. Here's the older iteration of him. It was actually, he looked more like a generic like soldier, like a police officer, some soldier with a blue outfit or whatever, like a counter-terrorist. But let's see, what did I do then? And then I reiterated him to look a little bit more like, have a little bit more color. And so I kind of played around with the idea of making the character have more of a casual look. I don't know if you know the German special forces, but they sometimes I saw pictures of them. They'll wear like blue jeans and stuff in their tactical gear, and that's kind of what this design's inspired from. It's sort of that casual tactical gear. Yeah, you can kind of see this is the process. And then I didn't like how this sprite looked, and so I just went to some pen and paper and I just kind of drew out another iteration of him. This drawing's a little rough, as you can tell, but I did draw over that. So this is what I played around with. I drew over that, and this is probably the very first sprite that I made of this character. And then I was kind of playing around with different colors for his goggles and his hat. And I ended up settling on the yellow goggles with the green baseball cap. And I didn't change the headphones, and I think I like the character a lot. I think the colors are come off as a nice neutral. And there's enough variety in his color palette that I think he stands out. But yeah, that's kind of how he developed. And then after that, I started just kind of going from there. I started adding a gun to his hand. You now get to see like a whole palette of different stuff that got changed here and there. I don't know why his head's gone here, but I think it was for the death sprite here. Whenever you die in the game, he'll like enter this little like twitchy like pose, and then he'll like fall on the ground. So I think that's why his head is missing. But yeah, I changed him from his like neutral pose to having like him like holding something. So let's see. Now here are the guns. Here's some of the guns you can have. I might as well like spoil some of it. It's okay. I mean, I'd rather people play the game first before they kind of watch this, but it's okay. It's not a big deal. It's up to whoever's watching. Yeah, there's a shotgun. That's like some of these guns are based off of real weapons. Like it's loosely supposed to be like a tactical USP. This one's supposed to be an 1887 shotgun. This is supposed to be, that's the newer one. This is the older version of the SMG. But I went back to the cutting board and I reworked it so it looks more like a TMP. That's what I tried to make it look like. That's one of my favorite SMGs in games. So yeah, I made like a blue TMP, which is so weird. I like blue. But there's also a reason for like why I wanted to make every gun like a different color too. It's just to make them stand out a little more. But then I also, where's the beta? So this was the older version of the terrorist, and you can kind of see how he looks very roughed out. And I started to kind of work on the characters more. Originally, the enemy sprites were also going to have their gun like down, and then they would pull it up when they were going to fire. But for economic reasons and for the sake, I mean, it's not a big deal. I don't find, some people might find it's a big deal, but frankly, it's like, it works, and there are a lot more things to worry about than, I mean, someone holding a gun to the side and pulling up. But here was one of the looks of the terrorist was actually he was going to have like a little more of a casual, like business casual look to them. But I kind of went against that, and I just stuck with like a generic like long sleeve shirt, just because I felt like I didn't want to make him look too extravagant. So these were the newer sprites that I made. Here's the thing. Here's like a stun anim sprite. I never got to use that. Here's the flinch sprite when he gets hit from a bullet. Then I worked on the knife guy. Actually, I worked on the machine gun guy, but he got tweaked a little bit more and cleaned up. So originally his color was a little bit on the cooler side, and but I changed him to look a little more magenta with a stronger magenta tone. So I think you kind of get the idea. In terms of animating them, I mean, it's really just a 4-frame animation of them with the walk cycle. The shield guy, I don't think I have the sprite, but originally his shield looked a lot different, and I changed it to have like kind of like look like it was a lot more durable. Originally it looked like it was made of like plastic. That's all I'm gonna say. It was like red and white, so it didn't look very like, it didn't look sturdy, and so I changed it to like a stronger like metallic tone, and I gave it like, there was also like an X on it originally, and I liked that, so I stuck with that, and I put like construction tape, or like you know, the caution tape you find whenever you like shouldn't enter a construction zone. Like that's kind of like that. So I really like that a lot. I think that was a nice, I like that. Yeah, and I gave him purple shoes because, I mean, come on, he's got a style with those purple shoes. So yeah. Here's a drywall sprite. Here's the older version of the drywall sprite. That's the yellow. It's all yellow. It's like made of cheese. It's like butter. It's a butter wall. But then I looked at some references and I was like, oh, drywall actually has a bit of a very brittle like color palette to it. And so that's what I tried to work towards. And I think it looks like more like drywall. I think I did an alright job. It definitely looks better than this block of butter. This butter block. But probably my favorite thing animating these sprites was probably just doing the flinching poses where they're like, they get shot and they're just kind of like reacting to that. That's probably my favorite thing to animate. You can also see, like, so I think you kind of get the idea, like the characters kind of went through different iterations, and like there were some changes that what happened, like the machine gunner guy's machine gun got changed to look more like a little more intimidating and more like an actual gun that looks like it fires like heavy like lead. So I kind of like added a little style to it and added like a shark face to it. So yeah, that's kind of the fun. Like doing character design stuff like this is pretty enjoyable. But yeah, that's kind of the idea behind like doing the graphics. And I stuck with just like a simple color palette because, again, like, I mean, I only have so much time to make a game. So I hope that kind of gives you an idea. I'll also show you the blocks that I used for the game. Let's see. Oh yeah, the drywall was originally 2 units high, but I cut it down to 1 just for the sake of, I don't know, keeping it simple. But yeah, this is really all it was. It's just me kind of just constantly reworking the tiles here and there to make sure it looks good. You know, here's the first area. Here's the second area. Yeah, I think you kind of get the idea. It's just a lot of like playing around with like color tones and saturation values and just seeing, okay, I want the first area to be more of a yellow color. I want the second one to be kind of a bluish tone. Originally the floor in the second area was going to be blue, but I was like, what if I made this look more like a You know how like whenever like someone's building like a house and then you can kind of see the parts where like you're between like the drywall and you see all like the wooden frames and stuff. Like what if it looked more like that? So that's kind of what the second area was. And then the third area is, red. You kind of get the idea. That's really what kind of goes into the graphics. Okay, so for the music and sound, I'll talk about the sound because it's pretty brief. I really just used like a generic like audio editing program and just kind of stack and play around with sounds and just try to get the right tones, stretching certain sounds, changing their pitches, changing their EQ values. That's like it just like allows me to change like the bassy or how tinny a certain sound might sound. And I just kind of stack them and just try to like incorporate different sound effects into each other to try to create gunshot sounds of different types. I kind of play some right now to kind of give you a better idea of what some of the guns sounded like beforehand. As for the music was made with FL Studio, and I just kind of put together just some tunes here and there just to try to get something that was upbeat but didn't feel like too happy or too like it was some kind of like cutesy game, but I wanted to make it still feel like it was like it pushed you along, So that was kind of like the sort of idea behind making the music. The original, if you download the OST for the game, there's actually an older version of this song, Bank Stuff. I actually made this song like I think a year ago, and so for rule reasons, I actually had to ask the main director of the competition if I was allowed to use it, and he said yes, but I decided to try to redo the song to make it sound a little more, I guess, HD. So this is the new result, is I made a newer version of the song, and I think it turned out a lot better. So this will kind of give you an idea of how it's kind of put together. Alright, so I hope that kind of gave you a bit of a better idea as to how my music's put together, but that was really all it was, and some of the songs like sounded a lot different. They definitely sounded way different from what they were. So again, it's just a lot of iteration. With the amount of little time I had, it's pretty amazing that I was even able to make all the songs. But I mean, I honestly was, because I was like on like day 28, and I was like, geez, like some of these songs just don't sound very good. Like, and so it was kind of like this breaking point where some of the songs sounded very different like, or ended up very different from what they were. And so there was a part of me where I was like, you know what, just roll with it. Like, we don't have much time. Let's just put it out there. But then a part of me was like, this just doesn't sound right. And so the current soundtrack that you'll hear when you play the game is the final version. I would personally say that I think it turned out a lot better than it did in the long run, because the older versions definitely did not fit. And so, yeah, again, it's just a lot of reiterating and just a lot of recompiling. That's really what game development becomes. It's a lot of work. It is. I mean, it may not seem like it, but there's just a lot of redoing work here and there, and just constantly trying to like find that right groove to something until it just clicks, you know? The playtesting for the game, there wasn't really much playtesting, but I submitted the game before the deadline, so woohoo! However, I noticed that when I had some of my friends playtest the game, it started to crash, and then there was some weird like AI behaviors, and so I ended up doing a couple patches for the game because I realized that like, oh crap, like the game crashes when you spray your machine gun and you die. Like, that's not good. That should not happen. So there was a lot of stuff like that where I couldn't bear to have that happen to anyone new who wanted to play this game. So there were a lot of patches that happened left and right. Something as simple as this text right here. Before it said near enemy, left click melee. That's what it originally said, but I changed it to say right/left click melee. And there's a reason for why I changed it to that. Originally, I had a friend who played the game, and I noticed that, and I suggested, you know, I wonder if I'm noticing that I think you're trying to take a stealthier approach and you're trying to melee these guys, but you accidentally shoot your gun. Because left click is also melee if you get close to them. It's also the shoot button. So I decided the grace solution was to avoid taking an extreme and saying, okay, left click is only shoot. Although I feel like part of me still feels like I could do that. I didn't want to make that move just in case people might get upset. So I decided, all right, well, let's make the right click exclusively melee. And that helped the game a ton, especially for people who wanted to take that a little bit more of a stealthier approach and just like melee enemies exclusively. Or like most of them melee, and then they can like shoot the rest because there's lesser of them, you know? So that was like one of the things I changed. There's just a lot of bugs. Some AI was just like kind of cheap. And so as of right now, I currently uploaded version 1.2. And so you should definitely check that out. I think I've got it down in terms of like the versions right now. I think that's probably the best one I've done, and I don't know if I'm really going to update it unless like there's some really nasty bug or something. So I think I found a pretty good closure point for the game. So yeah, I'm trying to think what else to talk about, but I think that's really it. If you haven't played the game and you're watching this, I mean, well, first off, I really hope you enjoyed listening to this commentary. I don't do videos like this very often, oftentimes because I find, well, there's a difference between doing a very well-edited video where you're talking about a game's development versus kind of just doing blank commentary and also doing just development. And development is a very boring thing to watch, I'm going to be honest. I think, well, I just hope you enjoyed this more because, again, like, editing something does take time, and it's not something I really do anymore. I just don't have that kind of the time like I used to be able to, like, make videos. Like, there's a reason why I don't do frag videos or any of that shenanigans anymore. So yeah, I hope you liked the video. I hope you learned something, and if you're ever curious about learning game development, there's a lot of tutorials out there, and there's a reason why I don't say myself, just because, again, like, although I am able to code games, I just find that my approaches to the way I code some stuff isn't always the wisest way. But that's just me. But anyways, that's it. If you know anyone else who you think might really like this game, again, it's an action, top-down, fast-paced shooter, tell them about it. And I hope they enjoyed the game. And that's it. So thanks again, and I'll see you guys around whenever.